Come on, bitch, let's go. Come on, get ready, bitches. You haven't seen nothing yet. Come on.
Valentino, Versace, Lamborghini, Bugatti. I got money to burn. I'm single and I'm naughty.
Come on.
Tiffany's, Cartier, Gucci on Marty.
Come on.
Break out your black card, boys. It's time to party.
So you guys, we've had one of the most catastrophic storms hit Florida in 100 years, I think they said in the media. It came in really hard in the Sarasota, Fort Myers area, which was unexpected. It was actually expected to really come in hard through Tampa. It created tornadoes in really unusual places like Palm Beach, which is not even close to Fort Myers or Sarasota. It created tornadoes in Vero Beach and other locations throughout Florida. Cape Canaveral, I think, was another one. And those tornadoes are catastrophic. They destroy houses, communities, and buildings. There were police stations where roofs were ripped off and all the cars got damaged, hundreds of police cars, etc. So it was a really devastating storm for loads of people. Now, I saw that the hurricane was heading in the direction to impact me, John, and my house, and we were right in the line of fire as it exited out the back of Florida. And I said, you know what? I don't want to risk it. I really don't. We are close enough to water where we could have a storm surge. So I literally packed up my car. I took my son out of school on Monday, and at 7 a.m. I drove up to Miami to stay at my parents' house because I heard the storm was only going to have the outer bands in that area. And it's always a gamble because you just don't know, where it's going to go. But it was looking like through the science that it wasn't going to hit there. And luckily for me, I have parents in Miami. So I, headed out. I jumped ahead of the traffic by just leaving right away during school. And we get to Miami in the regular time frame. It wasn't extra long. We were going away from the traffic. Everyone was migrating out of the state of Florida towards Georgia. We were in opposite direction heading further south into Florida. So I hit no traffic. Okay, so everybody went north and I went south. It was crazy. Now, Miami got only a few wind bands and a little light tropical wind. I mean, it really was nothing in Miami. They didn't lose power. I really went to the right place when I evacuated because other parts of northern Florida and Georgia were still impacted by Helene. And I know what caused the panic with everybody. It was because the storm was so large, so many people were under mandatory evacuations, and they usually go to places like Disney World and Universal Studios to kind of hide out because they have backup generators and thousands of rooms. Well, guess what? Disney and Universal shut their room reservations down a few days before the storm started, which would cause people to really panic because that was their go-to place. But I guess Disney and Universal took the position that since it was going to hit them as a Cat 3, they didn't want the liability of people going there. I don't know. It was weird because in the past they let people go. So something changed and they didn't this time. And I think people were like, oh my gosh, now where do we go? And because Helene damaged so many places in the north, they were like, where do we go there? And there's no hotels and everything was sold out and there was a run on gas. And, the gas companies kept delivering gas and they would sell out and there was a run on water. And so there was no water for people. And some people lose the ability to have water when electric's out. So it created real havoc. And it was a really weird storm, Milton, because in some places it caused storm surge that flooded as expected and caused a lot of water damage. And in other places, there was that wind that's flying around and getting into everything. In some places, there was zero impact, right? It was like it never happened, like Miami. And then there were places that received these random tornadoes coming off the hurricane that were in totally different areas to where the hurricane was hitting. So places like Cape Canaveral and Vero Beach and, the like, and they were completely devastated in some neighborhoods by it. So it was just a strange storm. My neighborhood, one power line went down. The electricity was lost. No damage to my house. My neighbors had a lot of debris, fences fallen down. One of my neighbors lost a tree. That was pretty much the most in my area. But the thing is, the power going out, don't underestimate what that does to people, because let me tell you, to not have water or heat water, to have zero AC in Florida in 100-degree heat, in high humidity, with debris and everything everywhere is really tough. So you have to go outside, clean your house. You know your food is going to start to deteriorate even if you've got a generator. You got no AC. It's tough. It's a tough situation, and usually the power goes down for 3 days when it goes. So people die inside when that happens. Now, I don't know. We'll see by the time this show airs whether the power's back on in my neighborhood, but I certainly hope so, because I need to go home today as the show drops. John was out of school all week, and tomorrow he's out of school too, but for a teacher day, not the hurricane. It's a lot, you guys. And I have news, not great news, but we also heard there's another hurricane coming, maybe October 21st timeframe. So if you can believe it, this will be back-to-back 3 storms. Like, I can't. So let's just pray that one just does not happen as is being kind of talked about. Well, that brings me to today's show. I wanted to reach out to some friends of mine that are very respected journalists in California. Actually, one of them is in London right now doing the show from there. Her name is Belden and Paul Gullixson. They are fabulous journalists. They are mainly, like I said, California-based journalists, but Anne is actually in the UK right now working, so she's doing the show from there. But they're experts at what can happen in a storm, especially as it relates to the elderly, which are the forgotten ones during these types of catastrophic events, which saddens me so much to say. It infuriates me too, because I have such respect for our old people. Now, I want to tell you, one of the reasons I reached out to Anne and Paul to come on the show today is they wrote a book called INFLAMED, and it's about a bunch of elderly people that were just abandoned during a fire that happened in October 2017. It was the Wine Country fires, specifically the Tubbs fire. I'm not going to go into too much detail about that because they're going to talk about it. But on October 9th, 2017, 2 nursing homes that had also memory loss divisions literally just left their elderly in these facilities to face the fires and die. And essentially, because 2 or 3 or 4 people went up to see if their elderly had been evacuated as they thought they had been, they literally broke through police saying, don't go, because they said they weren't sure if their parents were okay. They were like, I am going. I want to know they're gone. They broke through barricades and went in, and they come in, and thank God they did, because guess what? The elderly weren't evacuated. They were sitting around scared to death with flames around their facility, and one of them does burn to the ground. So those elderly would all be dead now if those people hadn't done it. And would you believe that these people were such heroes that they were just regular folks, and they ran in and saved all of these elderly people with the very little resources they could gather from local law enforcement. They were able to flag down their own cars and calling some people to help that didn't just leave. It's a harrowing story. You know, it did have casualties, but not at the level that it could have. And when I get into the cover-up that follows from this fire and what happened at this nursing home, it's going to blow your mind. But this is timely. Why? Well, in Bravo Land, which a lot of you listen to my podcast because you associate my show with that, and I do cover those types of topics from time to time. You know, you may remember that there was a really loved character. His name was Michael Kelcourse. He was on a show called Southern Charm. He was a butler on the show for Patricia Altschul, who's, of course, the founding, cast member of Southern Charm.
So here's the butler's pantry, and here's the butler.
Michael. I hear you make a mean martini.
I do my best.
So a martini is only a gin martini, right?
In this house, they're made with gin, but I've been told that there are people who enjoy vodka as well. I just haven't met any.
I like vodka martinis.
In that case, I shall make a vodka martini.
So how do you feel about all the shenanigans that goes on here when there's a big party?
We have had a few moments where I felt that the individuals that arrived might not have been up to the residents.
Have you ever kicked anyone out?
We did have to kick someone out once.
The maid found him asleep on the dog bed in the kitchen.
And he's never been back.
Never.
And Michael had gone to a nursing home environment because he's older, not too old, by the way. He's in his late 60s. I think he just had his 70th birthday last year. He ends up going to an elderly care facility. While at the elderly care facility, he has a stroke. Then he has another stroke. And Patricia took to Instagram the other day to announce it. You probably saw it in the tabloids. She said, please write cards to Michael because he's feeling really down right now because he's had this stroke. And so I look at the articles and I promote it to have the fans write him letters that they care. And it turns out his nursing home is in Sarasota, I find out. Well, imagine my horror when I realized that the hurricane is coming direct into Sarasota where his nursing home is, and the poor guy just had a stroke. Are you kidding me? And so not only now am I worried about Milton and all the people in Florida and how it's impacting them, and of course my own selfish interests in terms of my own property, son, and lifespan, and my family that's located here, but now I'm really worried about Michael in Sarasota and whether or not he's going to be evacuated properly, because I hate to say it, they always wait till the bitter end to get the most vulnerable population evacuated from institutions. I don't know why, but that's what they do. So I'm worried about Michael. This leads me to call my friend Ann and Paul about nursing homes and all that and what they learned in their situation to do with these fires. Because it turns out that the transparency you would hope would come from the government and the media outlets and the people who own these institutions is not there. And so therefore, it will never improve because people are lying to avoid liability. And you're about to hear of a serious cover-up story now and how the government was actually weaponized after to protect these elite interests. So let me bring Ann and Paul onto the show. Ann, Paul, thank you so much for joining me. I really wanted to hear from you after what's going on with Milton this week. And, my preoccupation with worrying about people that were not evacuated or, it's questionable how they were evacuated in the elderly community. And also, frankly, a very different community, but still one all the same. There was a lot of people outraged because in Pinella, Manatee, and Hillsborough, which is counties in Florida, they left all the prisoners in the prisons and didn't take them out. And they were going to be without food or water, and they would have been inundated with water. And the state took a position to just leave them there, and which I call passive aggressive killing. It's my own term. Thank you. Yeah. And I thought it really important to bring you guys into this conversation because you wrote this fantastic book called Inflamed: Abandonment, Heroism, and Outrage in Wine Country's Deadliest Firestorm. And I wanted you today to come on and talk about the book, talk about all of the different, elements. I've created a great show for us today for everybody. And then I want to kind of talk about the takeaways and sort of bring it back also to Milton, which we're all feeling right now, I think as a country, even though it happened in Florida, because it was so frightening to so many people.
Yes. Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for having us. It's still frightening to see. We're waiting to see the aftermath of Milton.
And the timing is haunting because this is not only the 7th anniversary of this particular fire out here in wine country that happened in 2017, but it's also just past the 7th anniversary of Hurricane Irma, where we saw a number of elderly people who died in that, in the aftermath of that, which actually triggered some of the campaigns we had to push for generators in some of our in our assisted living and retirement complexes, require mandatory backup generators, which is still not a law here in California.
That's so crazy. I'm dying to get into, the concealment, lack of policy that exists, because that's the juiciest part of frankly, your book, because it calls out the corruption surrounding this industry, which we're into on, Dishing Drama. Dana, we love the truth, or whatever. There are different versions of the truth, but at least hearing the different versions of the truth at a minimum. What I'd like you to do for everybody who isn't familiar with the book Inflamed, I want you to talk about how the book came about. And then also, I want you to give everybody a cliff note of the October 2017 wine country fires, specifically the Tubbs fire, which the book centers around.
Okay. Well, first, the book came about from, obviously this big fire, which we'll tell you all about. But Paul started reporting on it earlier because he was working for the Press Democrat at the time. I conducted an interview with one of the heroes of Inflamed, and I was actually helping one of my students. I run a journalism program at a college in Santa Rosa, California, and I conducted the interview with one of the heroes, Melissa Langels, who had gone up to this facility to retrieve her mother and ended up staying and helping to evacuate half the facility before it burned down. And it did burn down. And she and another woman, Kathy Allen, were left alone with the last 24 residents. About 10 of them were upstairs, most of them in wheelchairs or walkers and unable to walk down the stairs. Power was out. There were no generators. And they actually got locked out of the building in the middle of the night. She told her story. She was still obviously traumatized. This was about 10 months later. And then she showed me a website that showed that the corporation, Oakmont Senior Living, had just published that basically said that their staff, with the help of a few family members, had evacuated the last residents. And they made it sound like it was an orderly evacuation. And, pardon my French, but it was a complete shit show. I think it was the staff lacked training. There was no evacuation plan. There was no emergency plan. If there was, they claimed it burned. The only copy burned in the fire and nobody knew of it. The poor staff, I don't blame them at all. They were never trained. They had no keys to the buses out back. They lacked flashlights. They lacked basic supplies. And they didn't know how to carry residents downstairs. There's a maneuver they were given a handout on. They'd never practiced it. I mean, they had nobody. The executive director said that she was on her way. She never made it. So it was so botched that these elderly people ended up, some wrapped in sheets or just in diapers, barefoot, no dentures, no glasses, no hearing aids, no medicines. They ended up, at many different shelters. Half of them had dementia or Alzheimer's. Many were in wheelchairs. Like I said, a complete and utter shit show that took place.
And the name of these homes that were the subject matter of your book were Farina and Villa Capri.
Yeah, Verena and Villa Capri. Villa Capri burned down. Verena did not. And I'll let Paul tell you a little bit more about what happened at Verena.
The focus of the story, these two very high-end retirement complexes. One is an assisted living complex and one is for independent living. But both had people living in there that needed attention, needed care, especially in the assisted living where there was a memory care unit. A number of people were in wheelchairs, and essentially 105 of these residents total were essentially left behind as this fire came through the area. And I want to emphasize this was a devastating firestorm that swept through our region. This is the Tubbs fire in 2017, October of 2017. It started in Calistoga by down power lines. At the time, we had very heavy winds. They're known as Diablo winds sweeping through our area, heading west, southwest. And they were up to 70, 75 miles per hour. And it carried this flame from Calistoga to Santa Rosa in about 4 hours. And normally it's a good 30-minute drive just to drive that length of road. And all along the way, people were fleeing. It was a devastating firestorm, but there were a number of people who particularly senior care housing facilities in our area that were able to evacuate in an orderly manner. But what happened at Verena Villa Capri was really heartbreaking because in some cases you did have some low-level frontline workers, overnight staff who stayed behind to do what they could, but they didn't know what to do, as Ann explained. At Verena, a number of the staff just left, and we start the story story with a gentleman from Petaluma, a welder, who was woken by his sister because she was concerned about their grandfather, and she convinced his name is R.J. Kissling to go up there and check on their grandfather. And so he drives up in his pickup while all these other people are fleeing Sonoma County, going south on Highway 101 towards San Francisco and the Golden Gate Bridge. He's one of the few going north into the teeth of this fire, and he gets up there and the streets are barricaded and there's a police officer there, and he asked, has Verena and Villa Capri been evacuated? And the officer says, I think so. And he's not satisfied with that. So without asking permission, he basically just waves at the officer, drives around the barricade, drives over burning branches, through smoke, heavy smoke, and he finally finds his way up to Verena, and the power is out. And he still has cell service, and he calls his sister, says, I told you they would be evacuated by now. It would make no sense that they hadn't. And she says, go check Papa's room. So he puts on his headlamp, the power's out, he walks in, just, going to appease his sister, and he finds about 30 senior citizens all collected in the lobby. And one of them gets up and comes over to him and says, are you the firefighters? Are you here to save us? And this starts a saga where he begins to understand how many of these residents had been left behind. And it's a tragic story, but ultimately it is a story of heroism. Heroes, retired school teachers, welders, electricians who came up there because they were concerned about loved ones, and then they stayed and they saved the lives of so many people. But it's also a story of a tragic abandonment of people who were responsible for these people, but they didn't do their duty, they didn't know what to do, and some just fled and left them behind, and it's heartbreaking.
At a lot of these assisted living facilities, there is a culture of profit for let's make money rather than safety. And that is something that it's a multi-billion-dollar industry. It's a cash cow industry. And each state has different laws regulating assisted living. And Verena's independent and assisted living, and Villa Capri is assisted living and memory care. And the enforcement of whatever laws are on the books varies from state to state. There is no federal oversight saying you have to have this many staff on duty at night, or you have to have a manager on duty at night, or anything like that. There's no federal oversight of these places. And as Paul said, this was the highest end you could get. And people paid a lot of money for round-the-clock assurance that they would be taken care of. That's why you go into a place like that.
Yeah, if I can emphasize, these people are paying between $8,000 to $12,000 a month for care in this facility. It's a beautiful facility, but as Ann pointed out, when this disaster came through, they suddenly realized how unprepared they were for a crisis. They were understaffed. As these staff didn't know where the flashlights were, they didn't have an evacuation plan. They didn't even know where the keys were to these large shuttle buses they had parked in the parking lot and went to waste. They could have used those to evacuate people, but they were never used. And ultimately, and then we had two executive directors, one who said she was on her way up. The executive director for Villa Capri told the staff, I'm on my way, and she never showed up. And to this day, we don't know where she was for about 6 hours of the timeline of that night. Meanwhile, the executive director for Verena, he did come when there was a power outage. He left with a carload of residents and said he was coming back, didn't leave anybody in charge, didn't leave any instructions, and he never returned. He said he was prevented returning because of barricades, that volunteers at barricades had said he couldn't go back in, but others found their way around the barricades. But the reality was, after the executive director left to Verena, many, if not all, the workers there left as well. So it was a story of abandonment by management in particular, which was heartbreaking.
I don't understand. In Florida, like with Milton, the governor is calling out to the different people and entities and reporting on the news what is going on with the hurricane. So, for example, he was like, we've just evacuated 300 hospitals. We've sent evacuation orders to these 80 counties, and they're like mandatory. So I don't understand how there was no order given to this elderly, vulnerable nursing home in the fire area? Is it because it happened so fast? Or what do you think?
Yeah, if I could answer that just real quick, Ann. Yesterday, in fact, I was talking to the head of our Department of Emergency Management in Sonoma County. We were talking about the Milton hurricane, and he was saying he's been through hurricanes, he's been through wildfires, and he said they're both awful, but he would rather have a hurricane to deal with because at least a hurricane, you know it's coming. You can see it coming. In this case, this wildfire came so quickly, it swept across our area in a matter of hours, and it came in the middle of the night, so that like I was evacuated at my home. We were evacuated at 2:30, 3 o'clock in the morning because a neighbor pounded on our door, and I looked out and he could see the flames coming toward our neighborhood. And then with the power being out, a number of people didn't have cell service, and it was hard to connect and know what was going on. And then we had the problem of that we had fire coming from both directions, from the south and from the north. And we hit our main highway here. We didn't know whether to go south or north, which was the safe direction. So some of these things a wildfire can be very devastating in the sense that you don't know when it's going to hit, and it sweeps in so quickly. That's when lives are really lost. And that's why, and as Ann and I said, that we feel this book is so relevant because in wildfire, any of these catastrophic natural events that are occurring with such greater intensity, it's so often our seniors who are most often the victims. We see it happen, more often than not, more than half, if not 2/3 of the victims are people over the age of 65. We saw it with Hurricane Irma, and I hate to say, but we're probably going to see it again with Hurricane Milton.
Yeah, for sure. I think so. So fires are a totally different beast because, for example, I read up for this show on how the hospitals, hospices, and elderly homes here that were really getting the brunt of the hurricane addressed their people. And what they did is they put up aqua walls that blocked the water. They moved all of the staff to the second floor where it would be above a 15-foot surge, because surges here are deadly. It's like a tsunami. All the water gets drawn out of the harbor. It's totally dry. People who don't know what's happening, can get really hurt because they think, oh, it's low tide, but it isn't. It's the water's been pulled out by the hurricane, and then it comes in like a tsunami, right. Huge waves crashing in, and suddenly your entire house is underwater in a moment. And so they move the people to the second floor and the workers. Some people listen to the mandatory evacuation and remove the patients that can be moved to sister locations because we have networks of hospitals here. But I guess my question to you is, you can't move somebody to the second floor in a fire, right? So what is the answer on a fire? Like, what should be places like California that have all these fire situations come up? What is the solution?
Well, one is planning and having a plan, having a solid plan and training employees to that plan, having a transportation plan. We profile another facility that was less than a mile away, where the executive director had a plan, had trained her staff. She told managers, hey, if you hit roadblocks, just blaze through them and take the ticket. And they had everyone's medicine. They got everyone downstairs so that while the power was on, they called ahead for their buses. They had a contract with a bus company and a place to take them. Oakmont Senior Living at that time, they had no evacuation point, no evacuation plan, nowhere to take them. They had people who could drive, meet them in a shopping center parking lot. But at Brookdale nearby, the executive director, she didn't wait for emergency services, which were just stressed beyond belief that night. Every police officer, firefighter was out there. There were actually multiple fires that night, not just the Tubbs fire. Everybody was out there. She didn't wait. She climbed up on the roof with her maintenance director, looked at where the fire was, and said, we're out of here. You can't always rely on first responders. You have to have your own plan. And your plan cannot be, as it was at Villa Capri, to call 911. 911 was inundated. A lot of people couldn't even get through that night.
Yeah. And if I may, at Verena and Villa Capri, unlike Brookdale, which Ann just mentioned, who had a great process, and they had a buddy system. They checked people. They had markers on the door for each room that had been cleared. They counted for everybody, had them on the bus and off the hill in plenty of time, and there was no problem. But at Villa Capri and Verena, they had an opposite policy, which was to shelter in place. They were actually telling residents to go back to their rooms. Some of them woke up at 11:30 that night when they heard the alarm go off. Some came downstairs and asked what was going on. They said, "Oh, it's no problem. We turned off the alarm. Go back to bed." And then they came down later because they smelled smoke. Some opened their windows and could see the fire coming. They came downstairs, and some of them never saw staff again. And they were never told what was going on or what to do. They were, as we said, they were just left behind. And shelter in place, that whole policy is, hey, you wait in your room until you're told what to do. But many of these people were never told what to do. In fact, we actually found a couple of people who, I think three, how many, Ann, in the end, who were never rescued. They slept through the night. They took out their hearing aids and they woke up the next morning. Fortunately, Verena did not burn, thanks to the heroics of a fire crews that created a perimeter, allowing time for the residents to be rescued. But there were still some residents that were left behind, even through all that. And they woke up to look around them, and they thought, the world a bomb had gone off. They thought North Korea had attacked, or one of them thought North Korea had finally attacked the United States. But some of these people never did, never did get out.
So I wanted to ask you something really incredible to me is that the website for Oakmont Senior Living did not depict the cluster that this was when they were talking about how things went down with the evacuation to do with these fires. I also want to talk about why they would suddenly change their name to Gallagher Senior Living after all this goes down. I think it's a really important takeaway, patrons, to remember that just because your facility for elderly people is $12,000 a month and looks really fancy and has lots of amenities, that maybe that isn't the thing to look at. It might be actually looking at the safety protocols that the different homes you're looking at has. I think people don't tend to go there when they're vetting homes. They just kind of look at how nice they look. Does it have a library? What's the physical therapy? Yeah. So I think a really important takeaway I'm getting out of all this is the first thing I'd be asking for, depending on the state, is, what's your emergency evacuation programs, right? What happens if the power goes out the facility? And getting some sort of comfort and maybe something in writing to do with this. So if it fails, you actually do have grounds for a lawsuit because they didn't follow through with the protocol that they were supposed to for your loved one. That's a slam dunk, really, truly, because we're going to get into the lawsuit component about all this soon. But I want to understand what feels like a cover-up to me.
Yeah. What feels like a cover-up? Well, immediately after the fire.
For the full scoop, join the Dishing Drama Dana Patreon. The link is in this audio description. It's only $6 a month, and you'll get the best information and tea about the things you care about. And even the things you don't know you care about. What are you waiting for?